The clinking of wine glasses filled the air at her parents' sprawling mansion, a place that always felt more like a museum than a home. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over the polished hardwood floors, and the hum of conversation mixed with faint jazz from a speaker somewhere in the corner. I stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass of red I hadn't touched, watching the crowd of Camille's family and friends celebrate her new corporate job offer. It was a big deal, her stepping into a finance role at a tech giant, a chance to climb the ladder she'd been eyeing for years. I was proud of her, even if she didn't think I had any right to be. The room buzzed with excitement, her cousin snapping photos, her father nodding approvingly at anyone who'd listen about his daughter's ambition. But then her mother, Elaine, raised her glass, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade wrapped in silk. To Camille finally leveling up and leaving behind the freeloaders, she shouted, her eyes flicking toward me for just a moment. Laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it carried that sharp edge of judgment I'd grown used to. I felt the weight of every glance, every smirk, as if I were some stray dog they'd let in out of pity. Then Camille turned to me, her lips curling into that mocking smile she'd perfected over the past year. Seriously, Mason, she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, get a life. Stop hanging around Jake just to feel important. He's rich and successful. You're not. The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. The air went still, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Her uncle Darius chuckled nervously, muttering something about tough love, but no one else spoke. I could have said something back, could have let the anger bubbling in my chest spill out. But instead, I just smiled. Not the weak, pleading kind of smile that begs for approval. No, this was different. It was the kind of smile that knows something the room doesn't. Because Camille, for all her ambition and sharp words, had no idea whose signature was on her brand new paycheck. I took a sip of the wine, letting the bitterness of it match the moment. Around me, the party started to hum again, people pretending the awkwardness hadn't happened. Elaine glided over to Camille, whispering something that made her laugh, and I watched my wife soak it all in, her moment, her victory. She looked beautiful, I'd give her that. Her dark hair was swept up, her dress hugging her frame like it was made for her. But beauty doesn't soften a sting like that. I'd heard her jabs before, the little comments about my lack of drive, or how I was lucky to know someone like Jake Lawrence, her idea of a real success story. She'd say it at dinners, at gatherings like this, always with that same smirk, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out my flaws. And every time, I'd let it slide. Not because I was spineless, but because I was waiting. See, I'd learned something about people over the years. They show you who they are when they think you've got nothing to offer. Camille thought I was just a guy coasting through life, leaning on my old college buddy Jake to feel relevant. She didn't know the truth, and I hadn't told her, not out of fear, but because I wanted to see how far she'd go. Tonight, though, her words cut deeper than usual. Maybe it was the crowd, the way her family leaned into her insult like it was a punchline they'd all been waiting for. Or maybe it was the way she didn't even glance back to see if I was okay. Either way, something shifted inside me. I set my glass down on a nearby table, the stem catching the light for a moment. Across the room, Camille was laughing with her cousin, already moving on from her little performance. I could have walked over, pulled her aside, and laid it all out right then, told her everything. But where's the value in that? Truth isn't just words, it's timing. And tonight wasn't the night. Not yet. Instead, I slipped through the crowd, nodding politely at a few familiar faces. Uncle Darius caught my arm as I passed, his breath heavy with whiskey. So, Mason, what do you actually do these days? He asked, his voice loud enough to draw a couple of glances. It was the same question he always asked, like he was digging for dirt. I gave him my usual vague answer, something about consulting, helping out with Jake's projects. He nodded, unimpressed, and let me go. That's how it always went with her family. To them, I was the guy who didn't quite fit, the one who married up and hadn't earned it. As I stepped onto the balcony for some air, the cool night hit my face, grounding me. The city sparkled below, all sharp lights and distant noise. I leaned against the railing, replaying her words in my head. He's rich and successful. You're not. If only she knew. If only she had any clue that the man she mocked was the one who'd built the very foundation she was now standing on. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more like disappointment, mixed with a strange kind of curiosity. How would she react when she found out? Would she laugh it off, like she did tonight? Or would it shake her world just enough to make her see me differently? I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen lighting up with a text from Jake. Heard about the party. You good? He wrote. I smirked. Jake knew me better than anyone, knew why I kept my cards close, why I let Camille think what she wanted. I typed back a quick reply, all good. Just waiting for the right moment. The party noise drifted out to the balcony, Camille's laughter cutting through it all. I straightened up, brushing a speck of dust off my jacket. This wasn't the end of anything, just the beginning of something else. She could have her toast, her moment, her applause. I didn't need any of it. What I had was better control, patience, and a truth that would hit harder than any insult she could throw. I stepped back inside, ready to play my part a little longer, my smile still in place. The game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The loft where it all started still lingers in my mind sometimes. A cramped space with peeling paint, secondhand furniture, and the faint hum of cheap fans struggling against summer heat. Jake and I spent countless nights there, hunched over laptops, fueled by Red Bull and stubborn dreams. That's where Pulse Logic was born, where I wrote the first lines of code for an AI system that would change everything. Now, years later, I stood in my home office, a sleek room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline, staring at a screen filled with data only I could untangle. People see Jake as the golden boy, the guy with the perfect smile who charms talk show hosts and investors alike. They see his polished boots clicking across stages, his name in bold on magazine covers. But behind every step he takes is me. I'm the architect, the coder, the ghost who built the system from scratch. And I chose to stay in the shadows, not because I'm ashamed, but because I wanted to see who Camille would be when she thought I had nothing to offer. It's not that I lied to her. I just never corrected her assumptions. When we met, I was already deep into the company, working late nights while Jake handled the public side. She'd ask about my day, and I'd keep it vague, talk about projects, or helping Jake out. She filled in the blanks herself, deciding I was some aimless guy riding my friend's coattails. At first, I thought it was funny, her little jabs about my lack of ambition. But over time, those jabs got sharper, especially after she started climbing her own career ladder. She'd come home from her old job, all fired up about some new promotion, and toss out lines like, "Maybe you should try harder, like Jake does." I'd just nod, let it slide, and go back to debugging code that powered a $120 million enterprise. Why didn't I tell her? It's hard to explain, even to myself sometimes. Part of it was curiosity. I wanted to know if she'd love me for who I was, not what I'd built. Another part was pride. I didn't want her respect just because of a title or a bank account. And maybe, deep down, I was testing her, seeing how far she'd go with her assumptions. She never asked the right questions, never pushed for details. Instead, she built this story in her head about me being less driven, less capable, less everything. And I let her, because the truth was mine to hold until I was ready to share it. That morning, I sipped coffee at my desk, the steam curling up as I scrolled through emails. Most were routine, updates from the dev team, bug reports, a few investor queries Jake had forwarded. He was good at the big picture stuff, the handshakes and headlines. But the guts of the company? That was me. Every algorithm, every server, every line of code that kept Pulse Logic running had my fingerprints on it. We'd agreed early on to split the roles. He'd be the face, I'd be the foundation. It worked. He got the spotlight. I got the freedom to create without cameras in my face. And it kept things clean. No ego clashes, no power struggles. Just two friends who trusted each other to do what they did best. Camille was getting ready for her big first day at her new job. I could hear her in the bedroom, humming as she picked out an outfit. She'd been talking about this job nonstop for weeks, how it was her chance to finally make something of herself, as if she hadn't already been doing that. I didn't mind her excitement. It was one of the things I loved about her when we first met, that fire in her eyes when she talked about her goals. But lately, that fire came with a shadow, a need to prove she was better than me, better than where we'd started. She walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood, and grabbed her bag from the counter. "Don't wait up," she said, barely looking at me. "I've got a lot to learn today." "Good luck," I said, keeping my tone light. "You'll kill it." She paused, just for a second, like she was surprised I'd said something nice. Then she gave a quick nod and left, the door clicking shut behind her. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She had no idea where she was headed, not just to some shiny corporate office, but to a place I'd built from nothing. It wasn't about tricking her. It was about letting her walk her own path, even if that path led her straight to the truth I'd been holding back. Later that day, Jake called. You sure about keeping this quiet? He asked, his voice crackling through the speakerphone. She's gonna flip when she finds out. Let her find out when the time's right, I said, tapping a pin against my desk. She's got her shot now. Let's see what she does with it. He laughed, that easy laugh that made people trust him instantly. You're colder than I am, man. I'd have spilled it by now. Nah, I said, smirking. You'd have made a PowerPoint about it. We both chuckled, but there was a weight to the moment. Jake knew why I was doing this, knew it wasn't about revenge or ego. It was about clarity, about seeing who Camille really was when the masks came off. I hung up and turned back to my screen, pulling up the latest system diagnostics. The numbers flowed like a language I'd invented, each one a piece of the empire I'd created. Camille could think what she wanted for now. She could call me a freeloader, a shadow, whatever made her feel taller. But the truth? It was bigger than her words, bigger than her smirk at that party. I stood and walked to the window, the city stretching out below like a map of possibilities. Somewhere out there, Camille was stepping into her new role, probably charming her colleagues, already planning her next move. She thought she was entering Jake's world, a place where he was the genius and I was just a name she mocked. But she was wrong. This wasn't Jake's world, it was ours. And sooner or later, she'd see my hand in every piece of it. Not because I'd force her to, but because the truth always finds a way out. I went back to my desk, the coffee now cold in its mug. There was work to do, always more work. A bug in the latest patch needed fixing, and the dev team was waiting for my notes. I dove in, the code pulling me into that quiet place where everything made sense. Camille could have her moment, her new desk, her big plans. I didn't need to chase her applause. What I had was enough control, purpose, and a secret that would shift everything when it finally came to light. For now, I'd keep building, keep waiting, keep being the man she didn't see. Because when the curtain finally lifted, it wouldn't just be about her job or her paycheck. It'd be about who we both were when the lies fell away. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in my home office, casting thin stripes across my desk as I sipped coffee and scrolled through a report from the dev team. It was just another day, lines of code to review, a server glitch to troubleshoot, the usual rhythm of keeping Pulse logic humming behind the scenes. But then my phone buzzed with a call from Jake, his voice carrying that mix of amusement and urgency he saved for big news. Her resume landed in HR, he said, cutting straight to it. Camille's. She applied for the finance analyst role. Got credentials, too. Want me to block it? I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly, and stared out the window at the city waking up below. Block it? The thought flickered, tempting for a moment. It'd be easy to keep her out, to keep my world separate from hers. But that wasn't the point. I'd been watching her build her own story about me, about us, for years, letting her think I was just a guy scraping by on favors. This was a chance to see what she'd do with a real opportunity, no strings attached. Let her rise or fall on her own, I told him, my voice steady. Jake chuckled, like he'd expected that answer. You're a weird one, Mace. All right, I'll let HR know to keep it fair. I hung up and set the phone down, the weight of my choice settling in. Fair. That's what I wanted, for her to earn her place without my name tipping the scales. Not because I doubted her. Camille was sharp, driven, the kind of person who could charm a room and crunch numbers in her sleep. But she'd spent so long looking down on me, I needed to know who she'd be when she stepped into my world, unaware it was mine. Weeks later, I got the update. She'd landed the job. Entry-level finance analyst, $95,000 a year, a shiny new badge with her name on it. I was at the headquarters that day, tucked away in my private office on the top floor, a space nobody but Jake and a few execs knew I used. The building itself was a beast of glass and steel, all sharp angles and open spaces, designed to scream success. I'd had a hand in picking the architect, though nobody would have guessed it. As I worked through a system update, Jake swung by, leaning against the doorframe with a grin. She's downstairs right now, he said, strutting through the lobby like she owns the place. Doesn't know, does she? Nope, I said, not looking up from my screen. Not yet. He laughed, shaking his head. You're playing a dangerous game, man. I just smirked and kept typing. Dangerous? Maybe. But it wasn't about games, it was about truth. Camille thought I was unemployed, maybe dabbling in odd jobs for Jake, when he threw me a bone. She'd built that idea so firmly in her head that she never questioned it, even when I'd come home late from meetings or spend hours locked in my office. Letting her walk into Pulse Logic without knowing my role was just an extension of that, giving her the space to be herself, No filters, no faking it for my sake. I finished my work and decided to take a walk through the building, something I didn't do often. Most employees knew me as Jake's friend, maybe a consultant who popped in now and then. I liked it that way. Kept things clean, let me move without eyes on me. The elevator hummed as it dropped to the main floor, and when the doors opened, I saw her. Camille, standing by the reception desk, her posture all confidence as she accepted her badge from HR. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair pulled back, every inch the professional. I stayed back, blending into the crowd of employees heading to lunch. She didn't see me, didn't even glance my way, too busy soaking in the moment. Watching her, I felt a strange mix of pride and distance. She'd earned this, no question. The hiring team didn't know she was my wife. HR had strict protocols, and I'd made sure her application went through the same grinder as anyone else's. But there was something else, too, a quiet ache I didn't expect. She was stepping into a world I'd built, a place where my initials were literally etched into the tiles beneath her feet, and she had no clue. Part of me wanted to walk over, tell her right then, see the shock in her eyes. But I didn't. Timing matters, and this wasn't it. I headed back upstairs, the elevators hum a steady backdrop to my thoughts. Later that day, Jake sent me a photo from the onboarding session. Camille at a conference table, smiling with her new team, a Pulse Logic logo on the wall behind her. She's already making friends, he texted. I stared at the image, her face bright with possibility. It reminded me of the early days, when we talk about our dreams over cheap takeout, back before she started measuring me against her idea of success. Back then, I thought we'd build something together, not a company, but a life. Now, here she was, part of my empire, thinking it belonged to someone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every paycheck she'd get, every project she'd touch, every door she'd walk through, it all tied back to me. Not in a controlling way, but in the quiet, undeniable way that comes from years of work nobody sees. I'd coded the software that ran the company's core, designed the systems that kept it ahead of competitors. Jake was the voice, sure, but I was the engine. And Camille? She was just another employee now, one of hundreds who didn't know the man behind the curtain. That night, she came home late, her energy electric as she kicked off her heels and dropped her bag on the couch. "It's incredible," she said, pouring herself a glass of water. "The office, the people, the vibe. It's like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." She didn't ask about my day, didn't notice I'd been out late, tweaking a server issue. I just listened, nodding as she went on about her new desk, her new boss, how she could feel the innovation in the air. I could have told her I'd picked that desk model, or that the innovation came from my sleepless nights. Instead, I said, "Sounds like you're happy." She looked at me then, just for a moment, like she was searching for something. "Yeah," she said. "I am." Then she turned away, already lost in her plans for tomorrow. I watched her go, the distance between us wider than ever. She thought she'd stepped into Jake's world, a place where he was the star and I was nobody. But she was wrong. This was my world, ours, really, but mine in a way she couldn't imagine. And when the day came for her to see it, it wouldn't be because I shouted it from the rooftops. It'd be because the truth was too big to stay hidden forever. For now, I'd keep working, keep waiting, let her think what she wanted. The moment would come. It always did. The hum of my laptop filled the quiet of my home office, a steady rhythm that grounded me as I sifted through a backlog of emails. Outside, the city was settling into dusk, lights flickering on like stars against the skyline. I'd spent the day tweaking a new algorithm for Pulse Logic, the kind of work that felt like solving a puzzle nobody else could see. Most people at the company thought Jake was the mastermind, the guy who dreamed it all up and made it R. They weren't entirely wrong. He had a knack for selling the vision, for turning my code into something the world wanted. But the truth was Messier. Every breakthrough, every system that kept us ahead, came from my hands. And Camille? She was out there in the office, building her own story about who ran the show, with no clue I was the one she was really working for. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes as I thought about her first month at the company. Word had gotten back to me, little snippets from HR, casual comments from Jake. She was settling in fast, charming her team, tossing around buzzwords like she'd been born in a boardroom. Apparently, she'd taken to bragging about her proximity to power, as if being in the same building as Jake made her special. I could picture her in the break room, coffee in hand, tossing her hair as she said, "He's so inspiring. You can just tell he's the genius behind it all." It didn't bother me, not really. I'd chosen to stay out of the spotlight, let Jake take the bows. But hearing her say it, knowing she thought I was just some guy hanging around for scraps, stirred something I couldn't quite name. That afternoon, I'd gotten an email from one of the HR reps, someone I trusted to keep me in the loop without asking too many questions. She'd overheard Camille in the break room, laughing with a couple of analysts. "There's this other founder, right?" she'd said, her voice carrying that sharp edge she used when she was trying to sound clever. "Some ghost, probably just a legal placeholder. Jake runs everything, you can tell." The HR rep had typed it up word for word, adding a quick note. "Thought you'd want to know." I read it twice, my jaw tight, then closed the email without replying. A placeholder. That's what she thought I was. Not a man who'd built an empire from a folding table in a loft, but a name on paper, irrelevant next to Jake's shine. My phone pinged, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Jake, texting as if he'd read my mind. "Heard Camille's spreading her theories about you. Want me to set her straight?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, I imagined him walking up to her desk, casual as ever, and dropping the truth like a stone in still water. I could almost see her face, shock, then disbelief, then that quick scramble to rewrite the story in her head. It was tempting, but I typed back, "Not yet." I set the phone down and stood, stretching my arms as I walked to the window. The city sprawled below, a map of lives and secrets, and I wondered how many others out there were misjudged, unseen for what they really were. Camille's words didn't hurt as much as they might have once. They were just noise, part of the bigger picture I'd been watching unfold. She could think what she wanted, say what she wanted. The company didn't run on her opinions, it ran on my work. Every email she sent, every report she filed, every paycheck she cashed, it all flowed through systems I'd designed. She was a guest in my house, even if she didn't know it. Later that night, I drove to the office to check on a server issue nobody else could crack. The building was quiet after hours, just the hum of air conditioning and the faint glow of monitors left on by accident. I liked it this way, no crowds, no meetings, just me and the tech. As I worked in the server room, untangling a mess of cables and running diagnostics, I thought about the early days with Jake. We'd been kids, really, fueled by cheap pizza and big ideas. Back then, it wasn't about money or fame. It was about building something that mattered. I'd never cared about the spotlight, even when we started getting press, when investors came knocking. Jake thrived on it, and I was happy to let him. But now, with Camille spinning her stories, I wondered if I'd stayed quiet too long. The server beeped, signaling the fix was complete, and I leaned back against the wall, wiping sweat from my forehead. My phone buzzed again, this time an email from Jake, forwarded from one of his assistants. It was a screenshot of an internal memo Camille had drafted, something about streamlining budget reports. It was good work, sharp and efficient, the kind of thing that'd get her noticed. I read it through, nodding to myself. She was talented, no question. That's why I hadn't blocked her application, why I'd let her walk through those doors. But talent didn't mean she saw the whole picture. I locked up and headed home, the city lights blurring past as I drove. Camille was already asleep when I got there, her shoes by the door, her bag slung over a chair. I stood in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, and thought about the memo again. She was making her mark, carving out a place for herself, and I was glad for it. But every step she took was on ground I'd laid. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was climbing a ladder I'd built, praising a man who leaned on me for every major call. Jake still ran decisions by me, even the ones she thought were his alone. Budgets, contracts, tech rollouts, he'd call or text, asking for my take, and I'd give it. No ego, no fuss. That's how we worked. As I climbed the stairs to bed, I paused outside our room, listening to the faint sound of her breathing. She was happy here, in this life she thought she'd earned by outgrowing me. And maybe she had, in her own way. But the truth was bigger than her version of it. I didn't need her to know, not yet. Telling her now would be too easy, like flipping a switch and watching her scramble. I wanted her to find it herself, to feel the weight of it when it landed. Not out of spite, but because real understanding doesn't come from words, it comes from seeing. I slipped into bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. Tomorrow, I'd dive back into work, another bug to fix, another system to tweak. Camille would go to her desk, file her reports, maybe drop another line about Jake's brilliance. And I'd keep doing what I'd always done, building, waiting, letting the pieces fall where they would. The office gossip didn't matter, not really. Her theories, her break room chatter, it was all just noise. The company ran because of me, and sooner or later, she'd see it. Not because I'd shout it, but because the truth has a way of breaking through, quiet and sure, like a sunrise you can't ignore. For now, I'd stay the ghost she didn't believe in, and that was enough. The office was a ghost town that night, the usual buzz of keyboards and chatter replaced by the low hum of air conditioning and the occasional creak of a settling building. I was holed up in the executive suite, a corner room with a view of the city's jagged skyline, working late on a software patch that had been giving the dev team fits. The glow of my laptop screen lit up the desk, casting shadows across stacks of papers and a cold coffee mug I'd forgotten to refill. This was my element: code, quiet, control. No meetings, no handshakes, just me untangling problems nobody else could. I liked these hours, when the world slowed down and I could think without interruption. But then I heard it, the sharp click of heels on the hardwood floor, echoing down the hall like gunfire in the silence. I glanced at the clock, past 9. Nobody should have been here, not even the cleaning crew. The sound stopped just outside the door, and before I could close my laptop, Camille walked in. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide, like she'd stumbled into a room she wasn't supposed to see. Her blazer was slung over one arm, her hair slightly messy from a long day, but she still carried that air of confidence, like she owned every space she entered. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp, almost accusing. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Helping Jake," I said, the same vague answer I always gave. It was true enough. Jake had asked me to handle this patch personally, but it was also the kind of answer that let her fill in the blanks however she wanted. She rolled her eyes, stepping into the room, her heels clicking again. "Of course," she said, her tone dripping with that familiar mix of pity and frustration. "You just can't let go of his coattails, huh?" The words stung, though I didn't let it show. I'd heard them before, variations of the same jab, always aimed at making me feel small. But tonight, in this room, with my code on the screen and the weight of everything I'd built behind me, they landed differently. I could have corrected her right then, laid it all out, how this company, this office, this very moment existed because of me. But I didn't. Instead, I just held her gaze, my face calm, giving her nothing to grip onto. She shifted her weight, clearly expecting me to argue or shrink away like I usually did. When I didn't, her confidence wavered, just for a second. "It's late, Mason," she said, softer now, like she was trying to figure out why I wasn't rattled. "Why are you even in here? This is the executive suite." Before I could answer, Jake walked in, his tie loosened and a tablet under his arm. He stopped short, glancing between us, his easy smile faltering for a moment. "Hey," he said, nodding at Camille before turning to me. "Ready to sign off, Mace?" The air shifted. Camille's eyes narrowed, her head tilting slightly as she processed his words. "Wait," she said, her voice slow, like she was piecing together a puzzle. "He signs things off?" Jake froze, realizing his slip. He looked at me, waiting for a signal, but I didn't give one. Instead, I closed my laptop with a soft click and stood, stretching my arms. "Just wrapping up some tech stuff," I said, keeping it light, like it was no big deal. Camille wasn't buying it. She crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between me and Jake. "Hold on," she said. "What do you mean, sign off? Since when are you involved like that?" Jake, bless him, tried to smooth it over. "He's involved," he said, his smile awkward but genuine. "You know, helps with the big picture stuff sometimes." She laughed, but it was nervous, unsteady, like she was trying to convince herself it wasn't a big deal. "Sure he is," she said, her eyes locked on me now, searching for something, an explanation, a crack in my calm. I didn't give her one. I just grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and slung it over my shoulder. "Long day," I said, nodding at Jake. "I'll finish up tomorrow." As I brushed past her, I caught the faintest whiff of her perfume, the same one she'd worn since we met. For a split second, I remembered the early days, her laughing over cheap wine, me promising her the world. But that memory faded as fast as it came. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. I could feel her staring as I walked out, the weight of her confusion following me down the hall. In the elevator, I leaned against the wall, the hum of descent matching the buzz in my head. That was close, closer than I'd planned. Jake's slip hadn't been intentional, but it was a reminder. The truth was a restless thing, always looking for a way out. I'd wanted to control the timing, let her stumble across it naturally, but moments like this made me wonder if I was pushing my luck. Still, I wasn't ready to lay it all bare. Not yet. She'd have questions now, sure, but questions weren't answers. She'd probably brush it off, tell herself Jake was just being polite, that I was still the guy she'd pegged as a nobody. When I got home, the house was dark, quiet except for the faint drip of the kitchen faucet I kept meaning to fix. I poured a glass of water and stood by the counter, replaying the scene in my head. Her face when Jake said my name, the way her certainty cracked just enough to let doubt creep in. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I didn't want her to feel stupid. That was never the goal. I just wanted her to see me, really see me, without the story she'd written in her head. I thought about calling Jake, telling him to be more careful, but I didn't. He'd feel bad enough already, probably pacing his apartment right now, wondering if he'd messed up my plan. He hadn't. If anything, he'd nudged it forward, given her something to chew on. I set the glass down and headed upstairs, the stairs creaking under my weight. Tomorrow, she'd go back to her desk, maybe ask around, dig a little. Or maybe she'd let it go, too proud to admit she might have missed something. Either way, the seed was planted. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I wondered what she'd say if she knew the whole story. Not just that I was involved, but that I was the backbone, the guy who'd turned a crazy idea into a $120 million reality. Would she laugh it off? Get angry? Or would it finally make her pause, look at me like she used to, back when we were equals in her eyes? I didn't know. What I did know was that I wasn't here to beg for her respect. I'd earned it years ago, long before she started measuring me against her version of success. The clock ticked past midnight, and I closed my eyes, the memory of her heels still echoing in my mind. She could roll her eyes all she wanted, call me whatever names made her feel tall. I didn't need her to cheer me on. What I needed, what I'd always needed, was to build something real, something that lasted. And I had. Now it was just a matter of time before she saw it, before the truth stepped out of the shadows and stood in front of her, plain as day. For now, I'd keep doing what I did best. Work, wait, and let the pieces fall where they would. The morning started like any other, coffee brewing in the kitchen, the faint hum of traffic filtering through the windows, and me at my desk, staring at a screen full of code that needed my attention. The routine was comforting, a tether to the life I'd built, even as things with Camille felt like they were teetering on the edge of something big. I hadn't seen her much since that night in the executive suite, when Jake's slip about me signing off had left her with questions she didn't know how to ask. She'd been quieter at home, her usual jabs replaced by quick glances and half-started sentences, like she was trying to solve a puzzle but didn't want to admit it. I let her stew, didn't push, didn't offer explanations. The truth was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't be because I'd spoon-fed it to her. 2 weeks later, it happened. I was in my office at Pulse Logic, tucked away in the corner of the top floor where nobody bothered me, when Jake texted, "Payroll glitch today. HR scrambling. Camille's asking questions." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and smirked. Payroll glitches were rare. My systems were tight, but when they happened, they left a trail. I knew where this was going. Sure enough, an hour later, another text from Jake. "She saw your name on her stub. Freaked out. You want me to handle it?" I typed back a quick no. Let it play out. I could picture it, Camille at her desk, probably sipping one of those overpriced lattes she loved, opening her paycheck to check the deposit. Most people just glance at the numbers, but not her. She'd scrutinize every detail, always looking for a way to optimize. And there, at the bottom of the stub, in clean black ink, authorized by Mason Quinn. I could imagine her squinting at it, thinking it was a typo, a glitch, maybe even a joke. She'd probably laughed at first, that sharp, dismissive laugh she used when something didn't fit her worldview. But Camille wasn't one to let things slide. She'd dig, and that's exactly what she did. By noon, I got an email from HR, flagged as urgent. The rep, a no-nonsense woman named Karen who'd been with us since the early days, laid it out plain. Camille had stormed into their office, paycheck in hand, demanding to know why my name was on it. She thought it was a mistake, Karen wrote. Asked if we'd mixed up names or if there was another Mason Quinn. I pulled the internal docs to show her it was legit. She went pale, Mason, like she'd seen a ghost. I read the email twice, my pulse steady but my mind racing. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, though I hadn't planned it this way. Karen had done her job, nothing more, nothing less. She'd shown Camille the paperwork, the founding charter, the corporate ownership forms, the stock disbursement records. All of them with my name in bold, Mason Quinn, co-founder and chief technology officer. Not a placeholder, not a shadow, but the guy who'd built the engine that powered the whole damn company. Karen didn't say much about what happened next, just that Camille had sat down hard, staring at the documents like they were written in a language she didn't speak. She didn't faint, Karen added, but she looked close. I closed the email and stood, walking to the window. The city stretched out below, all glass and steel and restless energy, a world I'd helped shape in ways most people would never see. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. There was no rush of victory, no urge to gloat. If anything, I felt a strange kind of calm, like the air after a storm. Camille knew now. Not the whole story, maybe, but enough to crack the shell she'd built around me. She'd spent years thinking I was less driven, less capable, less worthy of her. And now she'd seen my name on the one thing she couldn't argue with, her paycheck. I wondered what she was doing at that moment. Was she still in HR, flipping through those documents, looking for a loophole? Or had she gone back to her desk, staring at her computer, trying to reconcile the man she'd mocked with the one who'd signed her salary? I could have called her, could have walked down to her floor and seen her face for myself. But I didn't. This wasn't about me chasing her reaction. It was about her sitting with the truth, letting it sink in. Jake called later that day, his voice a mix of amusement and concern. "Man, she's rattled," he said. "Saw her in the hall, and she barely nodded at me. You sure you don't want to talk to her? Clear the air." "Nah," I said, leaning against my desk. "She's got enough to chew on." He laughed, but it was cautious. "You're cold, Maze. I'd be freaking out if my wife found out like this." "She'll be fine," I said. "She's tougher than she looks." And she was. Camille didn't break easy. She'd clawed her way through a competitive field, earned her spot at Pulse Logic fair and square. This wouldn't destroy her. It'd just force her to rethink things, to see me without the filter she'd put up years ago. I hung up and went back to work, diving into a server log that needed attention. The code was clean, logical, a world where everything made sense if you knew how to look. I wished people were that simple, but they weren't, not even Camille. That night, I got home before she did. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of a clock in the living room. I poured a glass of water and stood by the counter, waiting. I didn't know if she'd bring it up, if she'd walk in ready to fight or just pretend nothing had happened. When I heard her key in the lock, my stomach tightened, but I kept my face calm. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softer than usual, like she was carrying a weight she didn't want to show. She set her bag down, glanced at me, and nodded quick, almost formal. "Good day," I asked, keeping my tone light. She hesitated, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, then closed again. "Busy," she said finally, heading for the stairs. "I'm beat." I watched her go, the moment slipping away without a word about the paycheck, the documents, any of it. Part of me wanted to call her back, to lay it all out and see what she'd say. But I didn't. She needed time, and I wasn't here to rush her. The truth was out now, raw and undeniable, and it'd do its work without me pushing. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my palm, and let the silence settle. As I headed to my office to finish some work, I thought about those early days, me and Jake in that loft, dreaming bigger than we had any right to. Back then, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone, not even ourselves. It was just about building something real. I'd done that, despite what Camille thought, despite what anyone thought. And now she knew, not because I'd shouted it, but because the truth had found her, quiet and sharp, like a blade she didn't see coming. For now, I'd keep working, keep waiting. The next move was hers, and I was ready for whatever came. The gala was in full swing when I arrived, the kind of event that made you feel like you'd stepped into a movie, chandeliers glittering overhead, waiters gliding through the crowd with trays of champagne, and a live jazz band filling the air with smooth, easy notes. Pulse Logic had pulled out all the stops to celebrate a new government contract, a deal that'd keep us in the black for years. I usually skip these things, happy to let Jake soak up the spotlight while I stayed behind my screens. But tonight, he'd insisted I show up, his voice firm over the phone. "You need to claim what you've built," he'd said. "No room for argument. This isn't just my win, it's yours." I'd grumbled, tugged at the collar of my tux, but deep down, I knew he was right. So here I was, standing at the edge of a ballroom packed with suits and gowns, feeling like a fish out of water, but ready to play my part. The room buzzed with energy, executives mingling, investors laughing too loud, employees snapping selfies with the company logo projected on a massive screen. I adjusted my tie, the sleek black suit Jake had practically forced me to wear feeling foreign but sharp. I caught my reflection in a mirrored pillar, taller than I remembered, my jaw set. I steady. For once, I didn't look like the guy Camille thought I was, the one she dismissed as a shadow. Tonight, I'd step into the light, not for her, not even for Jake, but for myself. I spotted her across the room, working the logistics team, clipboard in hand, her dress catching the light as she moved. Camille always had a knack for looking like she belonged, no matter the crowd. She was directing a staffer toward the dessert table, her smile professional but warm, the kind that made people trust her instantly. She hadn't seen me yet, hadn't noticed me slipping through the crowd, shaking hands with a few board members who knew my name even if most employees didn't. I kept my distance, letting her do her thing. After the payroll incident 2 weeks ago, we'd barely talked, her coming home late, me leaving early, both of us dodging the truth that had landed like a stone between us. She knew now, or at least she knew enough to question everything, but she hadn't brought it up, and I hadn't pushed. Jake found me near the bar, his grin wide as he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You clean up nice," he said, handing me a glass of whiskey I didn't ask for. "Ready for this?" I took a sip, the burn grounding me. "As I'll ever be," I said, glancing at the stage where the MC was testing the mic. He followed my gaze, then leaned in, voice low. "She's gonna lose it when she hears your name. You sure you're good with that?" I nodded, my eyes drifting back to Camille. She was laughing now, nodding at something an older exec said, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "Let her react however she wants," I said. "This isn't about her." Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't push. He knew me well enough to know when I'd made up my mind. The band wrapped up their set, and the MC stepped to the podium, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate a milestone for Pulse Logic." The crowd clapped, a few cheers breaking through. I set my glass down, my pulse steady but quick, like it was before a big code drop. The MC ran through the usual spiel, thanking the team, hyping the contract, tossing out stats that made investors nod. Then he paused, his smile widening. "None of this would be possible without the vision and grit of our founders. Please welcome our co-founder and chief technology officer, Mason Quinn." Spotlight swung toward me, bright and unyielding, pinning me in place. The room erupted, claps, gasps, a few murmurs rippling through the crowd. I felt every eye on me as I made my way to the stage, my steps deliberate, my face calm. Cameras clicked, flashes popping like tiny explosions. I didn't look at Camille, didn't need to. I could feel her stare, sharp and heavy, from wherever she stood. I reached the podium, shaking the MC's hand before turning to the crowd. They were a sea of faces, some familiar, most not, all waiting for me to say something that matched the moment. I'd never been one for speeches, Jake was the talker, but I'd prepared for this. "Thank you," I started, my voice steady, carrying over the room. "This company started with a simple idea, solve problems nobody else can. That's what we've done, and that's what we'll keep doing. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it." I kept it short, thanking the team, nodding to Jake, who stood near the stage, grinning like a proud brother. The crowd clapped again, louder this time, and I stepped back, letting Jake take over for the rest. As I moved off stage, I caught it, Camille, standing near a pillar, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. Her face was pale, lips parted, like she'd just seen something impossible. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw it all. Shock, realization, maybe even regret. Then she looked away, her grip tightening on the glass, and I kept walking. Back at the bar, I grabbed a water, the adrenaline still humming in my veins. Jake joined me, leaning against the counter. "Told you it'd hit hard," he said, his voice low but teasing. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip. "You weren't wrong." He glanced toward Camille, who was now talking to a colleague, her smile forced. "She's rattled, man. What's your next move?" "Nothing," I said, setting the glass down. Ball's in her court now. The rest of the night blurred. Handshakes, small talk, people I barely knew telling me how inspiring it was to hear from the other founder. I nodded, smiled, played the part, but my mind kept drifting back to her. Not because I needed her to say anything, but because I wondered what she was thinking now, after seeing me up there, my name on everyone's lips. Did it change how she saw me? Or was she already rewriting it in her head, finding a way to make it fit her old story? As the gala wound down, I stepped outside for air, the cool night biting at my skin through the suit. The city sparkled below, a reminder of everything I'd built, everything I still had to do. I didn't need the applause, didn't need the cameras. But standing there, With my name finally out in the open, I felt something shift. Not pride, not relief, just clarity. I wasn't hiding anymore, not from her, not from anyone. I heard the door open behind me, footsteps soft but deliberate. I didn't turn around, didn't need to. It was her, I knew it. But I wasn't ready for that talk, not yet. Let her come to me when she was ready, when the truth had settled deep enough to matter. For now, I'd done what I came to do. The stage was set, the curtain up. Whatever came next, I'd face it the same way I always had, steady, quiet, and sure of what I'd built. The days after the gala felt different, like the air in the house carried a charge I couldn't ignore. I went through my routine, coffee at dawn, code reviews in my office, calls with Jake about the next phase of the government contract. But there was a quiet tension under it all, a sense that something had cracked open and wouldn't close again. Camille hadn't said much since that night, since the moment she'd seen me on that stage, my name echoing through the ballroom like a truth she couldn't dodge. I'd caught her staring a few times, quick, searching glances when she thought I wasn't looking, but she hadn't brought it up, and I wasn't about to force the issue. I'd spent years letting her build her own story about me. Now that it was unraveling, I wanted to see what she'd do with the pieces. It was late one evening, maybe a week later, when she finally broke the silence. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes from a dinner we'd eaten separately, her working late, me buried in a server issue. The house was quiet, just the faint hum of the fridge and the clink of plates in the sink. She walked in, still in her work clothes, her heels left by the door like she'd shed some of her armor. I didn't turn around, kept scrubbing a pan, waiting to see if she'd speak or just grab a glass of water and vanish upstairs like usual. Then I heard her voice, low but sharp, like she'd been holding it in too long. "You should have told me." I set the pan down, drying my hands on a towel before facing her. She stood by the counter, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on me, not angry, exactly, but hard, like she was trying to pin me in place. "Told you what?" I asked, keeping my tone even, though I knew exactly what she meant. "Don't play dumb," she said, her voice rising just a fraction. "About Pulse Logic. About you being, whatever you are. Co-founder, CTO, the guy who built it all. Do you know how stupid I looked? Standing there at the gala, holding my champagne like an idiot while everyone clapped for you." I leaned against the counter, holding her gaze. Her words stung, but not like they used to. There was something raw in them, something honest, and I wanted to hear it all before I answered. "It wasn't about making you look stupid," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "You did that all on your own." Her eyes widened, a flash of hurt crossing her face before it hardened again. "So this was what? A game?" she snapped. "Letting me think you were nobody, letting me say those things about you. About Jake? Also you could what? Prove a point." I shook my head, stepping closer, not to crowd her, but to make sure she heard me. "It wasn't a game. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to love me for a title or a paycheck. I wanted to see who you'd be when you thought I had nothing." She laughed, but it was bitter, almost choked. "And what did you see, Mason? A shallow, status-obsessed bitch who'd rather chase Jake's shadow than look at you." Her words hung there, heavy, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. She wasn't wrong, not entirely. She'd spent years measuring me against her idea of success, cutting me down to fit the box she'd made. But I didn't hate her for it. I just wanted her to see it, to own it. "I saw someone who's smart," I said quietly. "Someone who's driven, who earned her place at that company. But yeah, I also saw someone who decided I wasn't enough before she even asked who I was." She flinched, her arms dropping to her sides. For a second, I thought she might cry, but Camille didn't break like that. Instead, she straightened, her voice trembling but sharp. "You could have asked me to stop. You could have said something, anything, instead of sitting there, smiling like it didn't hurt. Why didn't you?" I looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman I'd fallen for years ago, fierce, stubborn, always pushing. But I also saw the distance between us, wider now than ever. "Because I didn't want to fight for your respect," I said. "I wanted you to give it. Not because I'm the CTO, but because I'm your husband." She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes glistening but holding back. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until she turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know how to see you. Not like this." She walked out, her footsteps soft on the hardwood, leaving me alone with the dishes and the weight of what we just said. I didn't follow her. Didn't need to. She'd wanted to justify herself, to make it my fault for keeping secrets. But I'd given her the truth, plain and unvarnished. I wasn't here to punish her, but I wasn't here to beg for forgiveness either. The next few days were quiet, both of us moving through the house like strangers sharing a lease. I threw myself into work, debugging code, prepping for a tech rollout, anything to keep my mind off the ache in my chest. Jake called once, asking how things were, but I brushed him off. "She's processing," I said, and he didn't push. At Pulse Logic, I heard she was keeping her head down, still doing her job but without the usual swagger. Part of me wondered if she'd quit, walk away from the company now that she knew my role, but she didn't. She showed up, filed her reports, kept going. That was something, at least. I thought about that night a lot, her anger, her tears, the way she tried to turn it back on me. It wasn't about her looking stupid at the gala. It was about her realizing she'd misjudged me, not just as a founder but as a man. I didn't need her to grovel, didn't want her to. I just wanted her to see what I'd seen all along, that we could have been partners, equals, if she'd let me in instead of pushing me down. One morning, I found her coffee mug on the counter, still warm, a post-it stuck to it with a single word: "Sorry." I stared at it, my thumb tracing the edge of the paper. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I didn't know where we'd go from here, maybe nowhere, maybe somewhere new. But I knew one thing: I didn't need her applause to feel whole. I'd built Pulse Logic from nothing, turned a dream into a reality that paid her salary, and that was enough. I tucked the note in my pocket and headed to my office, the city waking up outside. She'd vented, cried, blamed me, and I'd let her. But now the truth was out, and it wasn't my job to fix how it made her feel. She'd have to figure that out herself. For now, I had work to do, systems to maintain, problems to solve, a company to run from the shadows. And if she wanted to talk, really talk, I'd be here. Not as the guy she mocked, not as the founder she didn't expect, but as me, steady, quiet, and done waiting for her to catch up. The house was quieter than usual that week, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I'd found Camille's note, sorry, on a post-it, left like a breadcrumb on her coffee mug, and it stayed with me, tucked in my pocket as I went through my days. I didn't bring it up, didn't ask her what it meant. Words like that need space to settle, and I wasn't in a rush to fill the silence. Work kept me busy. Pulse Logic was ramping up for a new software release, and I was neck-deep in code, tweaking algorithms and squashing bugs that only I could spot. But even as I worked, my mind kept drifting back to her, to the way things had shifted since the gala, since she'd seen my name on that stage and realized the man she dismissed was the one holding up her world. I'd heard bits and pieces about her at the office, not from her directly, but from Jake and a few others who kept an eye out. She was still showing up, still doing her job, but the swagger was gone. No more breakroom boasts about proximity to power, no more gushing about Jake's genius. Instead, she was quieter, focused, like she was trying to prove something to herself. Karen in HR mentioned she'd started asking about the company's outreach programs, the ones I'd pushed for years ago, tech workshops for women in underprivileged schools, stuff I'd always cared about but never advertised. It caught me off guard, hearing that. Was she digging into my world, trying to understand me? Or was it just her way of coping, finding something to hold on to after her version of me had crumbled? I didn't know, and I didn't ask. One morning, I decided to do something I hadn't planned. I was at my desk, the city humming outside my window, when I pulled out a small box I'd picked up on a whim, a high-end leather-bound notebook, the kind Camille used to jot down her ideas back when we'd dreamed together over late-night takeout. I grabbed a pen and wrote a note, keeping it simple. Camille, you're talented. You earned your place here. This isn't about revenge. It's about letting truth speak. Mason. I didn't overthink it, didn't try to make it poetic. It was just the truth, plain and clear, the way I'd always tried to be with her, even when she didn't see it. I drove to the office that afternoon, the box on the passenger seat. The building was buzzing as usual, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, employees weaving through the open-plan floor. I didn't go to my usual hideout on the top floor. Instead, I headed to Camille's desk, tucked in a corner of the finance department. She wasn't there, probably in a meeting, so I set the box down, the note folded inside, and walked away before anyone could ask what I was doing. It felt strange, leaving something for her like that, no explanation, no ceremony. But it wasn't about grand gestures. It was about giving her something real, something she could hold, and letting her decide what to do with it. I didn't hear from her about it, not that day, not the next. Part of me wondered if she'd tossed it, too proud to accept anything from me after everything. But I didn't dwell on it. I'd said what I needed to say, and the rest was up to her. Life kept moving, meetings with the dev team, late-night calls with Jake about scaling the new contract, the usual grind that kept PulseLogic running. I liked the rhythm of it, the way it pulled me into a world where things made sense, where effort led to results. If only people were that straightforward. A few days later, Jake swung by my office, leaning against the doorframe with that grin he got when he knew something I didn't. "She's been asking about the charity stuff," he said, crossing his arms. "The tech programs for schools. Wanted to know how we pick the locations, who funds it." Sound familiar? I looked up from my screen, my hands pausing on the keyboard. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Sounds like something I'd care about." He laughed, shaking his head. "Man, she's digging. Not saying it's because of you, but come on. That's your thing. She's never touched it before." I shrugged, turning back to my work. Maybe she's just curious. Jake didn't buy it, but he let it go, heading out with a promise to grab beers later. I sat there, staring at the code on my screen, but my mind was elsewhere. Camille, asking about the programs I'd poured my heart into, quietly, behind the scenes, the way I'd always done things. It wasn't an apology, wasn't a big declaration, but it was something. A step, maybe, towards seeing me as more than the guy she'd mocked at her parents' party. I didn't know if it'd lead anywhere, but it was enough to make me pause, to wonder if she was changing, slowly, the way I had years ago when I realized I didn't need applause to feel whole. That night, I got home late, the house dark except for a light in the kitchen. Camille was at the table, her laptop open, papers spread out around her. She didn't look up as I walked in, but I saw it, the leather notebook, open to a page filled with her neat handwriting. My note wasn't there, probably tucked away somewhere, but the sight of the book hit me harder than I expected. I grabbed a glass of water, keeping my movements quiet, not wanting to disturb whatever she was working on. As I headed upstairs, I caught a glimpse of her screen, a proposal draft, something about expanding the tech workshops to more schools. I didn't stop, didn't say anything, just kept going. In bed, I lay awake, the ceiling a blank canvas for my thoughts. I didn't need her to thank me, didn't need her to say she'd read the note or liked the gift. What I needed, what I'd always needed, was to know I'd built something that mattered, not just in code or contracts, but in the way it touched people's lives. Those programs, the ones she was now poking into, were part of that. If she was picking up that thread, even just a little, it meant something. Not a victory, not a reconciliation, but a shift, quiet and real, like the first crack of dawn after a long night. I thought about the early days, when I'd stay up coding while Camille slept, dreaming of a future we'd share. That future looked different now, fractured by her words and my silence, but it wasn't gone. Maybe we'd find a way to meet in the middle, or maybe we'd just learn to see each other clearly. Either way, I wasn't here to force it. I'd given her the truth on that paycheck, on that stage, in that note, and now it was hers to carry. For me, there was still work to do, systems to build, problems to solve. I'd keep going, steady as ever, letting the pieces fall where they would. And if she wanted to walk beside me, she knew where to find me, not as the founder, not as the ghost, but as the man I'd always been, waiting for her to catch up. The brunch was at Elaine's favorite restaurant, a fancy place with white tablecloths and waiters who moved like they'd been trained to disappear. I sat across from Camille, the hum of her family's chatter filling the air, her cousins swapping gossip, her father droning on about golf, Uncle Darius asking for more coffee louder than necessary. It was the kind of gathering that used to make my skin itch, all polished surfaces and veiled jabs. But today I felt steady, grounded in a way I hadn't in years. Camille was quieter than usual, her fork moving slowly through her eggs, her eyes drifting to the window now, and then like she was somewhere else. I didn't push her to talk, didn't need to. The past few weeks had been heavy, her finding my note, her digging into the company's charity programs, the unspoken shift between us, and I was content to let things breathe. The table conversation turned to work, as it always did with her family. Elaine leaned forward, her pearls catching the light, and asked Camille about her job at PulseLogic. "It's such a prestigious company," she said, her voice dripping with pride. "You must feel so lucky to be part of Jake Lawrence's vision." I took a sip of my coffee, hiding a smirk. Jake's vision. That's what they all thought, what Camille had thought too, until the truth came crashing in. She didn't answer right away, just nodded, her lips tight. And I wondered what was going through her head, whether she was replaying the gala, my name on her paycheck, or the notebook I'd left on her desk. Then her aunt, a woman with a laugh like a foghorn, turned to me, her fork waving in my direction. "So, Mason," she said, loud enough to pull every eye to me, "still trying to make something of yourself? Or are you just riding Jake's coattails forever?" The table went quiet, a few awkward chuckles breaking the silence. It was the same old dig, the kind I'd heard 100 times at these gatherings, but it hit differently now. I opened my mouth to answer, something vague, like always. But Camille spoke first, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "He's already made something," she said, her tone steady, not loud but firm enough to stop the room. "Everything, actually." I froze, my coffee halfway to my lips. Every head turned to her, then to me, the weight of her words sinking in. Elaine's eyebrows shot up, Darius coughed into his napkin, and her aunt just stared, like she'd misheard. I looked at Camille, our eyes meeting across the table, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see anger or defensiveness, just truth, raw and unguarded. She didn't smile, didn't soften it, just held my gaze like she was daring anyone to challenge her. Nobody did. The moment passed, conversation picking up again, but it lingered between us, heavy and real, like a door we'd both stepped through without meaning to. I set my cup down, my pulse steady but my mind racing. She'd never done that before, stood up for me. Not like this. Not in front of her family, where image was everything. I didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but it felt like something had settled, like the ground beneath us had finally stopped shifting. The rest of the brunch blurred, small talk, clinking glasses, Elaine steering the chat back to safer topics. I played along, nodding when I needed to, but my focus stayed on Camille. She didn't say much after that, just ate her food and answered questions with short, polite replies. When we left, she walked beside me to the car, our steps in sync, the silence between us not heavy but thoughtful, like we were both carrying the same weight. In the car, I waited for her to say something, to explain or backtrack, but she just looked out the window, her fingers tracing the edge of her purse. I didn't push. I'd spent years waiting for her to see me, and now that she had, at least enough to speak up, I wasn't going to demand more. I drove us home, the city slipping past, and thought about how far we'd come from that night at her parents' mansion, when she'd mocked me in front of everyone, her words sharp enough to draw blood. Back then, I'd smiled and waited, knowing the truth would find her. Now it had, and I wasn't sure what came next. At home, she went to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water while I hung my jacket by the door. I could have asked her about it, could have said, "Why'd you do that?" Or "What's changed?" But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and headed to my office, diving back into work, emails from the dev team, a bug report I'd been meaning to tackle. Routine was my anchor, always had been, and I needed it now to keep from overthinking. Camille didn't follow, didn't call me back for some big talk. She just moved through the house, her presence quiet but steady, like a shadow that didn't weigh me down anymore. Later that night, I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with that leather notebook I'd given her, scribbling something I didn't try to see. I paused in the doorway, watching her for a moment. She looked different, not softer, exactly, but less guarded, like she'd let go of something she'd been carrying too long. I didn't say anything, just grabbed a book and sat across from her, the silence comfortable for once. No anger, no accusations, just us, sharing space without needing to fill it with words. I thought about the road we'd traveled, her jabs, my silence, the slow unraveling of her assumptions. I'd built pulse logic from nothing, turned a dream into a reality that paid her salary, and I'd done it without needing her applause. But today, when she'd spoken up, it wasn't applause either. It was respect, quiet and unforced, the kind I'd stopped hoping for. It didn't fix everything, didn't erase the years of distance or the hurt we'd traded, but it was enough to make me see her differently, to wonder if we could find a new way forward, not as husband and wife, maybe, but as two people who finally understood each other. As I turned a page in my book, I realized I was okay with that. We'd likely go our separate ways. Too much had broken to pretend otherwise, but the idea didn't scare me. I'd build a life that stood on its own, with or without her, and I'd keep building, keep solving problems, keep chasing what mattered. She'd do the same, I figured, carving her own path with that fire I'd always admired, even when it burned me. The clock ticked on, the room soft with lamplight. No music swelled, no grand gestures marked the moment. Just us, sitting there, seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. It wasn't a happy ending, not the kind people write stories about, but it was real, and for me, That was enough. I closed my book, set it aside, and let the quiet hold us both. Knowing whatever came next, I'd face it the way I always had, steady, sure, and ready for the truth to lead the way. I woke up to silence that morning, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, even in an empty house. At first, I thought it was one of those rare moments when Lila was just being quiet. Maybe she'd gone out for an early morning run or decided to grab coffee before I got up. But as I moved through the house, the unease began to creep in. Her shoes weren't by the door. Her coat wasn't on the hook. I called out her name, expecting to hear her light-hearted reply from another room. But the echo of my voice was the only response. That's when I noticed the closet. Half-empty hangers dangled awkwardly, her favorite clothes missing. The drawer where she kept her jewelry and little trinkets was open, its contents cleared out. Even the framed photo of us from our anniversary, something she had insisted on placing beside the bed, was gone. I stood there, staring at the hollow remnants of her presence, trying to process what this meant. At first, I thought there had to be an explanation. Maybe she had left in a hurry for some reason and just taken a few things with her. Maybe there was some kind of emergency. I pulled out my phone, half expecting to see a missed call or a text message explaining everything. Nothing. Panic turned into confusion, then confusion into a creeping dread. I searched the house, even though I already knew the answer. Her suitcase was gone. The bathroom shelves where she kept her skincare products were empty. And worst of all, there wasn't even a note. For 8 years, we'd shared a life together. Lila had been my partner, my confidant, the woman I had built my future around. Sure, we had our ups and downs. What marriage didn't? But I never thought it was bad enough for her to just vanish like this. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. I sat down on the edge of the bed that suddenly felt too big, too empty. My mind raced, grasping at memories, looking for answers. Had I missed something? Were there signs I had ignored? I replayed our last few weeks together, combing through every conversation, every interaction. There were disagreements, sure. She had been distant lately, more irritable than usual. But nothing to suggest this complete abandonment of everything we had built. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was coming back. But as the hours turned into days, and the days into 2 long weeks, the reality became impossible to deny. She wasn't coming back. At first, I felt devastated. The kind of heartbreak that makes you feel like you're suffocating. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house like a ghost, haunted by her absence. Every little thing reminded me of her. The way she always left her coffee mug on the counter, the stack of magazines she kept by the couch, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. But as the days dragged on, the devastation gave way to something else, anger. Not the kind of anger that flares up and fizzles out, but the deep, simmering kind. How could she do this? How could she just walk away without a word, without even giving me the decency of an explanation? I had loved her. I had supported her dreams, stood by her through thick and thin. And this was how she repaid me? Friends tried to comfort me, but their words only made things worse. Maybe she's going through something, they'd say. Or, sometimes people just need to find themselves. But none of that felt like an excuse for the betrayal I was grappling with. This wasn't just about her leaving. It was about the way she had done it, the way she had discarded our life together as if it meant nothing. I spent hours replaying our years together, searching for the moment it all started to unravel. When had she stopped loving me? When had I become someone she could walk away from so easily? The questions circled endlessly, gnawing at me, but the answers remained elusive. By the end of those 2 weeks, I was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. The woman I had devoted my life to was gone, and I had no idea why. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the future I thought we were building, had been shattered. But even in the depths of that heartbreak, there was a flicker of something else. Something I couldn't name yet. A seed of resolve buried deep beneath the pain. I didn't know it then, but I was about to uncover a side of myself I hadn't known existed. 2 weeks of silence had passed, each day dragging slower than the last. I was beginning to accept that Lila wasn't coming back, though the questions she left behind gnawed at me constantly. Then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but a strange knot tightened in my stomach as I hesitated before answering. Hello? Hey, loser. The voice on the other end was smug, dripping with arrogance. It wasn't Lila. Hope I'm not interrupting your pity party. My grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? The man chuckled, a sound that made my blood boil. Name's Jeff. Thought I'd introduce myself properly since Lila didn't bother to. I'm her new man. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Jeff didn't seem to notice or care. He kept talking, his voice grating on every nerve I had left. Just wanted to let you know, she's doing great. She doesn't miss you, if that's what you were wondering. What do you want? I asked, my tone sharp, though my heart was pounding. Oh, nothing much, Jeff said, feigning innocence. I just thought you'd like to know how well things are going for us. The house is nice, real nice. Thanks for setting it up so perfectly. We're really making it our own. The house. My house. The realization hit like a thunderbolt, and the anger I'd been holding back surged forward. Jeff's voice droned on, something about redecorating and new furniture, but I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was racing, piecing together the implications of his words. Lila hadn't just left me. She had moved Jeff into the home we'd built together, the home I had painstakingly maintained. Thanks for everything, Jeff added, his tone laced with mockery. I guess you're good for something after all. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Letting him see my anger would only feed his arrogance. Jeff, I said evenly, cutting through his rambling, do me a favor. Oh yeah? What's that? Check the house deed again. The line went silent. For a split second, I could almost hear him processing what I just said. Before he could respond, I hung up. My heart was pounding, but a smile tugged at the corner of my lips. Jeff had no idea what he had walked into. The house, which he clearly thought was his prize for winning Lila, was legally mine. Every square foot of it. I had handled all the paperwork when we purchased it, and Lila had left those details to me. She didn't know, or didn't care, that her name wasn't even on the deed. She and Jeff had moved into a house they had no claim to, and I wasn't about to let them keep it. The call left me energized in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. The sadness and confusion that had consumed me were replaced by something sharper, more focused. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them steal what was mine. If they thought they could waltz into my life and take over, they were sorely mistaken. I poured myself a drink and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I didn't expect Jeff to call back right away. He needed time to uncover the truth, to realize the extent of their mistake. And when he did, I'd be ready. The thought of Jeff and Lila discovering the reality of their situation brought a flicker of satisfaction. They thought they were untouchable, that they'd pulled off the ultimate betrayal without consequence. But they'd underestimated me. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing the deed, the lease agreements, and every piece of paperwork tied to the house. My lawyer had always advised me to keep my assets well documented, and now that preparation was paying off. Everything was in my name, from the property taxes to the utilities. Lila and Jeff had no legal footing to stand on. The next day passed uneventfully, though I found myself glancing at my phone more often than usual. I knew Jeff would call back eventually. It was only a matter of time. Sure enough, by the late afternoon, the phone buzzed. His name wasn't in my contacts, but I recognized the number immediately. I let it ring for a moment before answering. Hello? You son of a... Jeff's voice was a mix of panic and fury. What the hell did you do? You own the house? I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone calm. It's all in the deed, Jeff. Maybe you should have done your homework before moving in. He launched into a string of expletives, ranting about betrayal, fraud, and how I couldn't do this to him. I let him rage, listening with a calm amusement that only seemed to infuriate him further. When he finally paused, Out of breath, I added, "Oh, and just so you know, the lease agreement you signed, that's with me too. And you're in violation of it." I hung up again, cutting him off mid-sentence. My heart was racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but I couldn't stop the grin spreading across my face. Let the games begin. The hours after Jeff's panicked callback were filled with a kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't just about having the upper hand. It was about reclaiming control. After weeks of confusion, heartbreak, and unanswered questions, I finally had the opportunity to set things right on my terms. I didn't hear from Jeff or Lila the next day. That silence was almost more satisfying than his frantic shouting had been. I could picture them pacing the house, poring over paperwork, and arguing about how they'd ended up in this mess. The image of Jeff, the smug man who had called me a loser, now floundering under the weight of his own arrogance, was poetic. I wasn't going to rush my next move. The beauty of the situation was that I didn't have to. Every legal document was in my name, and the law was entirely on my side. They could rant, rave, and throw accusations all they wanted, but nothing they did could change the fact that they had no claim to the house they were so eager to flaunt. In the meantime, I started putting my plan into motion. I reached out to my lawyer, Andrew, a sharp and meticulous professional who had helped me manage my real estate assets for years. When I explained the situation, he didn't hide his amusement. "So, let me get this straight," Andrew said, a hint of laughter in his voice. "Your wife left you, moved in with her boyfriend, and they're living in one of your properties?" "Pretty much," I replied, unable to suppress a small chuckle myself. Andrew shook his head. "You can't make this stuff up." "Well, the good news is you're in the clear. The deed is in your name, and the lease agreement gives you full control. If they're in violation, you have every right to terminate it." "That's exactly what I want to do," I said firmly. "No more playing nice." Andrew agreed to draft the termination notice immediately. "They'll have 30 days to vacate," he explained. "Legally, there's no way they can fight it, but I'm guessing they won't take it well." "I'm counting on it," I said with a wry smile. That evening, as I sat in the quiet of my home, I reflected on how far things had spiraled. Lila's betrayal had left me reeling, but now, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about drawing a line in the sand. Lila and Jeff had crossed it, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. 2 days later, the termination notice was delivered. I received confirmation from Andrew that it had been served to the tenants, and I waited for the inevitable fallout. It didn't take long. The phone rang just after noon. It was Lila. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Nathan," she began, her tone frantic. "What is this notice about? Why are you terminating the lease?" Stop," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "You don't get to play the victim here, Lila. You made your choices. You walked out. Now you're living with the consequences." Her voice wavered. But this is our home now. You can't just—" "It's my house," I corrected her. "You don't have a leg to stand on, legally or otherwise." She tried to argue, but her words were a tangled mess of desperation and half-hearted excuses. I didn't have the patience for it. "You and Jeff have 30 days to vacate," I said. "After that, I'll have no problem involving law enforcement if necessary." The line went silent for a moment. Then, in a quieter voice, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" I felt a flicker of something. Was it guilt? Pity? Whatever it was, I pushed it aside. "Because you don't get to walk all over me and expect me to stay silent. You made your bed, Lila. Now lie in it." I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I received another call, this time from Jeff. Predictably, he was livid. His shouting was barely coherent, a string of insults and threats that only served to reinforce how powerless he really was. I listened in silence, letting him vent until he ran out of steam. "You done?" I asked, my tone calm. "This isn't over," he spat. "We'll see about that," I replied and hung up again. The storm was just beginning, but for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Lila and Jeff had underestimated me, and now they were reaping the rewards of their arrogance. I wasn't just regaining control of my house. I was reclaiming control of my life. The fallout from the termination notice hit faster and harder than I expected. The morning after my call with Jeff, I woke up to a barrage of texts and missed calls from both him and Lila. They ranged from frantic pleas to outright threats, a chaotic cocktail of desperation that made their situation all the more satisfying to watch unfold. I ignored the messages. I had nothing more to say, and besides, the legal process was already in motion. The 30-day countdown had begun, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. By midday, Jeff's frantic texts escalated into another phone call. I answered this time, curious to see what angle he'd try next. "You're making a big mistake," he began, his voice dripping with barely contained anger. "You can't just throw us out. This is our home now." "Our home?" I replied, feigning surprise. "That's interesting, Jeff, because last I checked, the deed has my name on it, and you're violating the lease agreement. So no, it's not your home." He sputtered, searching for a retort but finding none. "This isn't fair," he finally said. "Lila and I have built a life here. A life in a house you have no right to," I shot back. "Maybe you should have thought about that before moving in." His tone shifted, becoming more aggressive. "If you think I'm just going to roll over and let you win, you've got another thing coming. I'll fight this." "Good luck with that," I replied calmly. "The law's on my side, Jeff. You might want to save your energy for packing." I hung up, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Jeff's bravado was crumbling, and it was only a matter of time before Lila followed suit. Sure enough, a few hours later, she called me. This time, her tone was different, not angry, but pleading. "Nathan, please," she began, her voice trembling. "Can we just talk? This has all gotten out of hand." "There's nothing to talk about, Lila," I said evenly. "You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. That's how life works." "But where are we supposed to go?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We don't have anywhere else lined up. You can't just leave us stranded." I paused, letting her words hang in the air. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt. This was the woman I'd once loved, after all. But then I remembered the way she'd left, the mocking tone in Jeff's voice when he first called me, and the pain of those first 2 weeks when I'd been left alone to pick up the pieces. "You should have thought of that before," I said finally. "This isn't my problem anymore, Lila. You made sure of that when you walked out." She tried to argue, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I ended the call, feeling a strange mixture of closure and finality. For the first time, I felt like I was truly in control, not just of the house, but of my life. The days that followed were quiet on my end, though I knew chaos was brewing on theirs. Mutual friends began reaching out, their messages laced with curiosity and a hint of gossip. "Did you really kick Lila and her boyfriend out of the house?" one friend asked. "Yes," I replied simply. "It's my house." The responses varied. Some expressed surprise, others outright support. But the general sentiment was clear. People were starting to see through Lila and Jeff's facade. The life they tried to build on the back of their betrayal was crumbling, and the cracks were showing. As their move-out day loomed closer, I received fewer messages from Lila and Jeff. I assumed they were too busy scrambling to find a new place to bother me, and I was perfectly fine with that. The silence was a welcome change, a reminder that their drama no longer held any power over me. When the day finally arrived, I stopped by the property after work to ensure they had vacated. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the lights were off, the curtains drawn. The house was silent, empty. I stepped inside and was greeted by a strange sense of calm. They were gone. Walking through the rooms, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The house, once a battleground for betrayal and heartbreak, was mine again. And this time, it felt different, cleaner, lighter, as though it had been purged of the negativity that had plagued it. I stood in the living room, taking in the stillness, and realized that this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a new one. Lila and Jeff had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they'd only freed me. As I locked up and headed home, I couldn't help but smile. The storm was over, and I had weathered it. Now, it was time to rebuild. The day after Lila and Jeff vacated the house, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't just the absence of their drama. It was the knowledge that I had stood my ground, reclaimed what was mine, and emerged stronger on the other side. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. Lila's departure, the betrayal, the smugness of Jeff's initial call, and the chaos that followed. It all played out like scenes from a movie. But now, the credits had rolled, and I was finally free to write the next chapter of my life. That morning, I drove to the house. It was a crisp, clear day, the kind that made everything feel possible. As I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I was struck by the quiet. The silence wasn't oppressive or sad. It was peaceful. The house felt empty, yes, but it also felt clean, as though it had been stripped of all the negativity that had once filled it. I walked from room to room, taking note of what needed to be repaired or replaced. Jeff and Lila hadn't exactly left things in pristine condition. There were scuff marks on the walls, scratches on the floors, and a lingering smell that I couldn't quite place. But none of it bothered me. If anything, it was an opportunity to make the space my own again. Later that day, I met with a cleaning crew and a contractor. The cleaning crew was efficient, scrubbing away every trace of Lila and Jeff's presence, while the contractor and I discussed plans to repaint the walls, refinish the floors, and make a few upgrades. By the end of the day, the house already felt different, brighter, lighter, and full of potential. As the renovations began, I found myself rediscovering a sense of purpose. I threw myself into the project, choosing colors, picking out furniture, and envisioning how each room would look once it was complete. It wasn't just about fixing the house, it was about rebuilding my life. The process was surprisingly therapeutic. Painting the walls felt like wiping the slate clean. Refinishing the floors felt like grounding myself in something solid and unshakable. Every decision, every small improvement, was a step toward reclaiming not just the house, but the part of myself I had lost during my marriage to Lila. Outside of the renovations, I started reconnecting with old friends and hobbies. Chris, my closest friend, made it his mission to drag me out of the house at least once a week. "You've spent enough time wallowing," he said one night as we sat at a bar, beers in hand. "It's time to start living again." He was right, of course. Slowly but surely, I began to re-enter the world. I picked up photography again, dusting off the camera that had been sitting and used in a closet for years. I started going to the gym, channeling my frustration and energy into something productive. I even joined a local hiking group, exploring trails I'd never had time to visit before. The more I focused on myself, the less I thought about Lila and Jeff. Their betrayal, once a constant source of pain, became a distant memory. I didn't know where they were or what they were doing, and I didn't care. My life was moving forward, and they were no longer part of the story. A few weeks after the house renovations were complete, I invited Chris over for dinner. As we sat in the newly decorated dining room, laughing and reminiscing, I realized how far I had come. The house, once a symbol of heartbreak, was now a place of peace and possibility. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home, my home. By the time Chris left that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation, but I had come out stronger. The house was proof of that, a tangible reminder of my resilience and determination. As I stood in the living room, looking out at the moonlit yard, I thought about what lay ahead. There was still work to be done, both on the house and on myself, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. The future was mine to shape, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. With the house fully restored and my life regaining a sense of normalcy, I thought the chapter with Lila and Jeff was finally closed. But of course, life rarely lets you move on without a few final twists. The day I received a letter from Jeff's lawyer, I couldn't help but laugh. It was a pathetic attempt at intimidation, accusing me of fraudulently evicting them and demanding compensation for the emotional distress I had allegedly caused. The audacity was almost impressive. Jeff, the man who had mocked me for weeks, was now trying to play the victim. I handed the letter to my lawyer, Andrew, who skimmed through it with a smirk. "This is nothing more than a desperate bluff," he said, tossing the letter onto his desk. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on." Andrew's confidence reassured me, but I couldn't help feeling a flicker of annoyance. Jeff and Lila had already taken so much from me. My peace, my trust, and the life I thought I was building. Now, they were trying to take my time and energy. But if they wanted a fight, I was more than ready. Over the next few weeks, Jeff's threats escalated. He called, texted, and even showed up outside the house once, yelling obscenities and demanding justice. Each time, I calmly reminded him that he was trespassing and that I had no intention of engaging with his antics. My resolve only seemed to enrage him further, which, admittedly, was satisfying. Meanwhile, Lila's approach was softer. She started sending me long, apologetic messages, claiming she had been manipulated by Jeff and that she deeply regretted her actions. "I never wanted it to end this way," one text read. "I was confused, Nathan. I made a mistake. Please, can we just talk?" Her words might have swayed me months ago, but now they felt hollow. The time for apologies had long passed. I didn't respond to her messages, and eventually, they stopped coming. Jeff, however, wasn't ready to give up. His lawyer sent another letter, this time threatening to sue for damages. Andrew, ever unflappable, crafted a response that was equal parts professional and scathing. He outlined the lease violations, the legal grounds for termination, and the overwhelming evidence in my favor. "If they want to take this to court," Andrew said, "they're going to lose. Badly." The letter seemed to do the trick. Jeff's lawyer went radio silent, and the threats stopped. Once again, I was reminded of how flimsy their entire plan had been. Jeff and Lila had built their relationship on lies, arrogance, and betrayal, and now they were reaping the rewards of their actions. With the legal drama behind me, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The house, now fully renovated, was a haven of peace and stability. My career was thriving, my friendships were stronger than ever, and I was rediscovering passions I had long neglected. Photography, hiking, and even cooking became outlets for creativity and joy, filling my days with purpose. One evening, as I sorted through old files, I stumbled upon the original deed to the house. Seeing my name on that document brought a wave of pride and satisfaction. This house had been a point of contention, a battleground for betrayal, but it was also a symbol of resilience. I had fought for it, not because I needed the property, but because it represented everything I had worked for and refused to let anyone take from me. Chris stopped by later that week, bringing a bottle of wine to celebrate what he called the official end of the Jeff and Lila saga. We sat on the porch, sipping wine and laughing about how far things had come. "You know," Chris said, leaning back in his chair, "a year ago, I was worried about you. But now, you're unshakable, man." I shrugged, smiling. I had to be. They gave me no choice. He raised his glass. "To resilience and revenge." I clinked my glass against his. To moving forward. The legal threats, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It was all behind me now. Jeff and Lila had tried to take everything, but they had only succeeded in teaching me how strong I really was. Their drama no longer held any power over me. My life was my own again, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a golden glow, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited about what lay ahead. Lila and Jeff's eviction was now a memory, and I was finally starting to enjoy the peace that came with reclaiming my life. Yet, life has a way of letting loose one last storm before the calm truly sets in. About a month after the legal drama ended, word began trickling back to me through mutual acquaintances. Jeff and Lila's relationship was imploding under the weight of stress and mutual blame. It seemed that their so-called perfect partnership hadn't been built to withstand reality. According to Chris, who always seemed to know the latest gossip, Lila had discovered that Jeff wasn't quite the man she thought he was. His flashy lifestyle had been funded by borrowed money and empty promises, and without the stability of my house and my unwitting financial support, the cracks in their relationship had become chasms. "They're not even trying to keep it private," Chris said one afternoon, grinning as he leaned against my kitchen counter. Apparently, she kicked him out of wherever they're staying last week. Some huge blow-up. People are saying Jeff's back to couch surfing. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The man who had so confidently declared, "I own your wife now," had been reduced to begging for places to crash. As for Lila, she was reportedly trying to piece her life back together, though her attempts to reconnect with old friends and acquaintances were met with mixed reactions. Betrayal, it seemed, had a way of catching up with people. Even so, I didn't feel the schadenfreude I thought I would. Knowing their lives were unraveling brought no real satisfaction, only a quiet sense of closure. They were living with the consequences of their choices, just as I had lived with the fallout of their betrayal. The difference was, I had used that fallout to rebuild, while they had let it destroy them. One afternoon, while I was working in the garden, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Lila. I hesitated before opening it, wondering what she could possibly have left to say. "Nathan, I know I have no right to ask, but I wanted to apologize. I see now how much I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. Jeff is gone, and I realize he was never who I thought he was. I was stupid and selfish, and I threw away the best thing I ever had. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry." I read the message twice, then set my phone aside without responding. Her apology, while unexpected, didn't stir much within me. There was no anger, no desire to argue or point out the hypocrisy of her words, just indifference. Lila's regret was hers to carry, not mine to absolve. In the following days, I learned through Chris that Jeff had tried reaching out to Lila, hoping to reconcile. She had reportedly refused, finally seeing him for who he truly was. It was ironic, really. She had left me for him, only to realize too late that her dreams of a better life were built on lies. While their drama unfolded in the background, my own life was flourishing. The house renovations were complete, and the space felt like a true reflection of me, calm, grounded, and filled with potential. I had taken up photography more seriously, turning it from a hobby into a side passion that brought me unexpected joy. Weekends were now spent exploring local trails, capturing sunsets, and rediscovering the beauty in the world. The friends who had stood by me during the worst of it continued to remind me that I wasn't alone. Chris was still a constant presence, dragging me to social events and pushing me to step outside my comfort zone. "You're too good a guy to sit around by yourself," he said one night, shoving a beer into my hand at a backyard barbecue. "The world deserves to see this new and improved Nathan." And while I wasn't quite ready to dive into dating again, I had started to entertain the idea. There was a woman in my hiking group who always seemed to end up walking beside me, her laughter brightening even the most grueling trails. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. A spark. A reminder that new beginnings were possible. As for Lila and Jeff, their lives had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the cost of betrayal and the fragility of relationships built on deceit. I didn't wish them ill, but I also didn't waste energy hoping for their redemption. Their journey was theirs to navigate, just as mine was mine. One evening, as I stood on the porch of my newly renovated house, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The chaos, the heartbreak, the anger, it was all behind me now. What lay ahead was a future filled with possibility, one I was ready to embrace with open arms. With the drama of Jeff and Lila firmly in the rearview mirror, I found myself settling into a life that felt entirely my own. The house, once a battleground for betrayal and heartbreak, had become a sanctuary. Each day brought new opportunities for growth, and I embraced them with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The renovations were finished, the last of the paint dried, and the furniture arranged just the way I liked. Every inch of the house reflected my personality and preferences. No compromises, no lingering traces of a life that had been tainted by deceit. It was a fresh start, and I relished every moment of it. With the house no longer a project, I shifted my focus to rebuilding myself. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my recovery. Dr. Miller, ever insightful, helped me confront the deeper wounds left by the betrayal. "Healing isn't about forgetting," she said during one session. "It's about finding peace in the memories, even the painful ones." I took her words to heart, revisiting old memories not with bitterness but with curiosity. What had I missed? What patterns had I ignored? The process wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of those reflections threatened to pull me under. But it was necessary. Each session left me feeling lighter, as though I was shedding the emotional baggage I had carried for years. Meanwhile, my social circle continued to grow. Chris remained a constant source of encouragement, pushing me to step out of my comfort zone. "You've spent enough time in your cocoon," he said one night over dinner. "It's time to spread your wings." And so, I did. I joined a local photography club, where I met people who shared my passion for capturing life's fleeting moments. Our outings became the highlight of my weekends, wandering through forests, exploring hidden beaches, and chasing sunsets with my camera in hand. Each photo felt like a small triumph, a reminder that beauty existed even in the wake of heartbreak. I also found myself spending more time with my hiking group. The woman who always seemed to walk beside me, her name was Sarah, had an easy way of making me laugh, even when the trail was steep and my legs ached. She wasn't just kind. She was genuine, a quality I hadn't realized I craved until I met her. We started meeting for coffee after hikes, our conversations flowing effortlessly. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something worth exploring. Through all of this, Lila and Jeff faded further into the background. I heard occasional updates through mutual friends. Lila was working a retail job to make ends meet, while Jeff had moved on to another unsuspecting target. Their story no longer evoked anger or sadness. Instead, it was a distant echo, a reminder of the life I had left behind. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my house, looking out at the garden I had nurtured back to life, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The pain of betrayal had once threatened to define me, but now it was merely a chapter in a much larger story. The lessons I had learned about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of setting boundaries had reshaped me into someone stronger, someone wiser. The house, once a symbol of broken dreams, now stood as a testament to my journey. It wasn't just a building. It was a reflection of my growth, my determination, and my ability to rebuild in the face of adversity. As the stars began to dot the night sky, I raised a glass to the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with open arms and an open heart. Months had passed since the chaos of Jeff and Lila had finally been put to rest. My life had become something entirely new, a mix of calm, fulfillment, and quiet excitement for the future. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer stung. Instead, they served as reminders of how far I had come. Then, one evening, at a mutual friend's birthday party, I saw her, Lila. It was the first time we'd been in the same room since her move-out day. She looked different. The confident, glamorous woman I had once known was now subdued, her demeanor quieter, almost hesitant. She caught my eye across the room, and for a brief moment, I considered walking away. But curiosity, or perhaps closure, kept me rooted in place. She approached me slowly, as though unsure of how to start. "Nathan," she said, her voice soft, almost timid. "Lila," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she admitted, glancing around the room. "It's been a while." "It has," I said simply, letting the silence fill the space between us. I wasn't going to make this easy for her, nor did I feel the need to. She shifted uncomfortably. "You look good. Happy." "I am," I replied honestly. "Life's been good to me." She nodded, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or longing. "I've heard about some of the things you've been doing. The photography, the house renovations. It sounds like you've really turned things around." I shrugged. "I've been busy." The conversation felt stilted, and I had no desire to prolong it. But before I could excuse myself, she spoke again, her voice tinged with hesitation. "Nathan, I just want you to know, I'm sorry for everything." I paused, letting her words sink in. Months ago, I might have craved this apology, might have thought it would bring some sense of closure. But now, standing in front of her, I realized I didn't need it. I had already made peace with the past, and her words, while sincere, couldn't change what had happened. "I appreciate that," I said finally, my tone even. But we've both moved on. What's done is done. She nodded, her expression falling slightly. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope, someday, you can forgive me. Forgiveness. It was a strange word, one I hadn't given much thought to in recent months. Did I forgive her? Perhaps. But more importantly, I had forgiven myself. For the times I had ignored the red flags, for the trust one had misplaced, for staying in a relationship that had long since lost its foundation. I already have, I said, surprising even myself. Not for your sake, but for mine. Her eyes glistened, and she opened her mouth to say something more, but I held up a hand. Take care of yourself, Lila. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the crowded room. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air washed over me, bringing with it a sense of clarity. That brief encounter with Lila had been the final piece of the puzzle, the last lingering thread of a chapter that was now fully closed. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just relief. Over the next few days, I reflected on how far I'd come. The house, now a haven of peace and creativity, was a symbol of my resilience. My friendships had deepened, my passions had flourished, and my connection with Sarah from the hiking group had grown into something quietly beautiful. Life wasn't just good, it was thriving. I had learned that closure doesn't come from apologies or validation from those who hurt you. It comes from within, from choosing to move forward and build something better. And that's exactly what I had done. As for Lila and Jeff, their stories no longer mattered to me. Whether they found redemption or continued down their paths of self-destruction was irrelevant. My focus was on my life, my growth, and the possibilities that lay ahead. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my house, camera in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a profound sense of contentment. This was my life now, simple, fulfilling, and entirely my own, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking back, I never imagined that betrayal would become the catalyst for the life I now lived. The scars Lila and Jeff left behind were once raw and painful, but time had turned them into marks of resilience. They reminded me of what I had endured, but more importantly, they showed me how far I had come. The house was no longer just a building. It was a sanctuary. Every room was a reflection of my choices, my growth, and my independence. The once shared spaces that had felt hollow after Lila left were now filled with laughter, friends, and new memories. The walls were lined with photographs I had taken, snapshots of trails I'd hiked, sunrises I'd chased, and moments of joy I'd rediscovered. Sarah had become a significant part of my life. What had started as casual hikes and coffee meetups had blossomed into something steady and meaningful. She was different, grounded, genuine, and kind in a way that felt refreshing after years of navigating the stormy waters of my past relationship. With her, there was no pretense, no agenda, just a shared appreciation for life and the moments that made it worth living. One evening, as Sarah and I sat in the garden, she turned to me with a smile. "You know, you've built something really special here," she said, gesturing to the house, the garden, and the life I had pieced back together. It wasn't easy, I admitted, my gaze drifting to the horizon, but it was worth it. And it was. Every painful moment, every sleepless night, every hard-fought step forward had led me to this point. I had learned to value myself, to set boundaries, and to embrace the things that truly mattered. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers of Lila and Jeff's lives. Lila was reportedly working a string of jobs to make ends meet, her once glamorous life a distant memory. Jeff, predictably, had moved on to another woman, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and burned bridges. Their stories no longer carried any weight in my life. They were simply echoes of a chapter one had closed. The final closure came one afternoon when I received a letter in the mail. It was from Lila. Her handwriting was shaky, and the envelope carried no return address. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to read what she had to say. "Nathan, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to write it. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that happened, and I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I was selfish, and I let my own insecurities and desires destroy something good. I've lost a lot since then, And while I know I can't undo the damage, I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure of what to do with it. Her apology, while appreciated, didn't change anything. I had already moved on, but it felt like a fitting epilogue to the story. Lila's acknowledgement of her actions was her burden to carry, not mine. As the months rolled on, I continued to build a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. My photography turned into a small business, with clients reaching out for portraits and nature shoots. The house became a gathering place for friends and family, its walls echoing with laughter and warmth. One evening, as I stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal that had once consumed me was now a distant memory, overshadowed by the life I had created. Lila and Jeff had tried to tear me down, but in the end, they had only pushed me toward a better version of myself. This was my life now, one built on resilience, self-respect, and the unwavering belief that even in the face of betrayal, it's possible to rebuild. The future was wide open, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see what it held. As the stars began to dot the sky, I raised a glass to the past, not in anger or regret, but in gratitude. It had shaped me, taught me, and ultimately set me free. And with that, I stepped inside, ready to embrace whatever came next.